Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to Oncology Classroom evening session. This month, we are having different interesting talks from selected topics from pediatric oncology. And as part of that, today evening, we are going to have one very interesting talk on role of radiation in management of neuroblastoma. This talk will be delivered by Dr. Nehal Khanna, who is a professor of radiation oncology at Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. She has also been the alumnus of the same institute, and she's having her keen interest in pediatric oncology. Thank you, Dr. Khanna, for accepting this invitation. And without wasting any further time, may I now request you to please take over the session and start your lecture. Thank you so much for being with us.
Touch upon the basic concepts of neuroblastoma. So neuroblastoma, also called as the disease of infancy, is the most common malignancy in an infant, less than 1 year or less than 1 month old. You can see in the graph, can you see my cursor? Dodul, can you see my cursor? Because I would be using it again and again. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So it is the most common.
Is it possible you use that red laser kind of thing that is better visible?
How to use it? I would not know.
Then you have to do it from your laptop.
No,
the pointer option.
Okay, I'm
Go to
so
this pointer
sorry.
option.
Hold on. So I'm on my PC right now. Can I do it?
Yes, ma'am. At the lower left side, lower bottom, if you go to the pointer option.
No, there's no pointer option.
Go to slide presentation mode, ma'am, please.
Okay, full screen you mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
you can use
I
this
saw.
laser pointer.
Yeah, I saw. Good. Every time you learn something new, right?
So, I learned it from Shukriya, ma'am.
So neuroblastoma is the most common tumor of infancy, and that's why it's called as the tumor of infancy. It is also the most common extracranial solid tumor across all ages in childhood. In India, we expect around 2,000 cases per year, and more than 60% of these cases would be of high-risk neuroblastomas. These are heterogeneous group of tumors, and if you all remember your MBBS days, the post-ganglionic primitive neuroblast cells that migrate from the neural crest, the neuroblastoma actually arises from these primitive neuroblasts, and it can be found anywhere along the sympathetic chain and also in the adrenal medulla, the chromaffin cells. These are very heterogeneous group of tumors with varying degrees of differentiation. And what I mean by differentiation is they can vary from a mature ganglioneuroma to a partly immature ganglioneuroblastoma to completely immature neuroblastoma. And all these have varying malignant potential. If I must say, probably biology plays the most important role in these tumors as compared to any other malignancy. And biology is incorporated in all the treatment algorithm because it obviously impacts the overall outcome.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. A green ribbon is coming at the bottom of the screen. Is it possible you reshare the...
But okay, I can't see that. I can't see it here. That green band I can see in my mobile, but not on my desktop.
Okay. Can you, ma'am, reshare the screen?
Okay, I shall. So I'll stop share. Perfect. Okay. And I'll share again?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it's not seen now, right?
Yeah,
it's not seen now.
Thank you, ma'am.
So it's a radiosensitive tumor, but not a radiocurable tumor because of its common presentation with metastatic disease. Radiotherapy is an important part of the multimodal treatment, especially for high-risk neuroblastoma, and role of radiation is essentially involving for all the different risk groups. How will a patient present? You know, the most common site, as I'll quickly show you this again, the most common site is the abdomen. So most of the children will actually present with distended abdomen. And if you would remember all the MCQs related to neuroblastoma, all those syndromes, the blueberry muffin sign, which was a blue cutaneous nodule, Horner syndrome, which was because of the involvement of stellate ganglion, refractory diarrhea, which is because of the secretion of VIP, opsoclonus myoclonus syndrome, raccoon eyes because of periorbital ecchymosis, peppery liver, so on and so forth. So the presentation can vary, and at times, because of marrow involvement, patient can also present with cytopenias, as well as paraparesis if there is spinal cord or any nerve involvement. So when this patient comes to us, what is the staging investigation? So the first staging investigation is the local imaging. It could be a CCT or an MRI, depending upon what site it is. An MRI is preferred because obviously it will give you better soft tissue delineation as well as involvement of neurovascular bundle. Few investigations which are inherent to the basic quality of neuroblastoma is the MIBG investigation. Iodine 131 is the gold standard MIBG that should be done, but I mean, it is gold standard essentially because the imaging quality is very good, but it has a very short half-life, and that's why it is logistically difficult to use iodine 123, and hence iodine 131 is most commonly used. Again, to repeat, iodine 123 is the gold standard, but the most frequently done is iodine 131. We obviously combine these patients with FDG PET-CT also. 80% of these tumors would pick up MIBG, but and significant number of patients will also pick up uptake in PET-CT. Obviously, these patients will have raised urinary catecholamines, and biopsy is imperative in almost all patients, not just for diagnosis, but also for sending these patients the sample for moleculars, the MYC and copy number, for DNA index, and also the presence of segmental chromosomal aberrations, which are very important. Without this, you cannot adequately risk stratify the patient, and without this risk stratification, you cannot optimally treat the patient. And obviously bone marrow studies. So I will be talking about MYC and amplification again and again. So what exactly is this? It's the amplification of MYC and locus at 2p24. A single copy is considered non-amplified, and more than 10 copies is considered amplified. 30% of neuroblastomas will present with MYC and amplification, and this is considered to be an independent negative prognostic factor. It is seen with advanced disease at the time of diagnosis, aggressive behavior. And even tumors with favorable features, such as in patients and in loco-regional disease, are upstaged to high risk, essentially because of MYC and amplification. Thumb rule, any MYC and amplification, the patient is converted to a high risk. There are other genetic abnormalities also, like the gain of 17q, the allelic loss of 11q, deletion of 1p, and high levels of expressions of TRK. Using all these features, subsets of neuroblastoma have been defined, and they are categorized as type 1 and type 2A/B. And we know that infants apparently fare well as compared to older children, essentially because of the absence of these negative prognostic factors. Segmental chromosomal aberrations are also extremely important and are now incorporated into the risk stratification. We know that the presence of segmental chromosomal aberrations imparts a negative prognostic component to the patient. This is a very, very important slide. We have to understand that before 1990s, image-based and surgery-based staging systems were used. The INSS, the International Neuroblastoma Staging System, was published in JCO in 1993, and it incorporated the previously used EVANS and the POG staging system. But this relied heavily on surgery, and there were other shortcomings also. So this was followed by the pre-surgical INRG-SS, which was developed for the International Neuroblastoma Study Group classification system. and was used in most of the North American and European cooperative group studies. It was not affected by surgery. It was not affected by undue importance given to lymph nodal staging. So this was the INSS staging. I would just brush through it because quite a lot of my slides will be covering these staging systems and the risk groups. So in INSS, which relies heavily on surgery and lymph nodes, stage 1 is localized tumor completely excised. 2A and 2B will have either tumor which is not excised or nodes were positive. Stage 3 are tumors which are unresectable. Stage 4 with metastasis. 4S is a peculiar group in neuroblastoma in which the dissemination is limited to skin, liver, and bone marrow. The age of the patient is less than 1 year, and the primary tumor is a small tumor. It's a stage 1, 2A, or a 2B tumor. COG classification essentially divides the patients into 3 groups: low, intermediate, and high. This was published in 2007. It uses the INSS stage, the age, the MYC and amplification, histology that was divided between unfavorable and favorable, DNA ploidy. So for uniformity of the treatment protocol across all major cooperative group studies, the INRG task force was created. They compiled data from more than 8,000 patients. Tumor imaging replaced the surgery in INRG. Pathology was not linked to age, and more robust genetic factors were incorporated. They also defined something which was called as image-defined risk factors, which were different for different sites of location of the primary tumor and the nodal disease. Essentially, it told, how it was infiltrating the adjacent structures. With the use of these IDRFs, the International Neuroblastoma Risk Group Staging System, which had 4 categories, L1, L2, M, and MS. MS was slightly different from the 4S that I had described earlier. Now, this is a very important slide because whatever we do actually depends upon this slide. This is the INRG consensus pre-treatment classification schema, which incorporates the INRG stage, age, histologic category, tumor differentiation, MYC and amplification, 11q aberration, presence of ploidy, and it classifies patients into very low, low, intermediate, and high group. This was published in JCO, and this has been used in almost all current trials now. So if you look at it, easy to remember, you can divide them into low, intermediate, and high risk. Low and very low is more or less similar. Being radiation oncologists, we know the role of radiotherapy in neuroblastoma is mostly in high risk. So it is very important for us to ascertain which patients will fall into the high risk basket. So thumb rule, any MYC and amplification patient goes straight away into high risk. Stage 4 patient or MS patient with an 11q aberration again comes in high risk. A non-infantile but metastatic patient comes in high risk. Just give me a moment. Yeah, so now which are the other patients that come? So if you look at the stage 4 patients, any stage 4 patient which is older than, can you see that red cursor? So any M patient which is more than 18 years is promoted to high risk. And MS patient which have this 11q aberration are again high risk. So now we come to individual risk. So first I will cover the low risk. Low risk, we have to know that the outcome is very good. So in quite a lot of these patients, the treatment is de-escalated. There are some patients who will benefit with just observation, even without doing a biopsy. And which will be these patients? These are perinatally detected neuroblastomas, smaller tumors less than 6 months of age, the size less than 3.1 centimeters, and INSS stage 1 tumors. So these patients are kept on observation. Some patients like INSS stage 2A and 2B patients, favorable biology and asymptomatic, can be offered surgery and without any adjuvant treatment. So which patients will require chemotherapy? So symptomatic patients, symptomatic low risk neuroblastomas will require chemotherapy. The most common agents are carboplatin, cyclophosphamide, doxo, and etoposide. The cumulative chemotherapy dose for each agent is kept low to minimize long-term side effects, because again, their outcomes are very good. They will live long enough to develop long-term side effects. And patients who are unresectable progressive disease after surgery, which is in fact in very few patients. So the COG-P 9641 is probably one of the most cited study in neuroblastoma. If you can see on the right side, the EFS and OS is very good. The 5-year OS is 97%. And most of these patients actually underwent surgery alone. And quite a lot of these patients did not undergo complete surgery. If you remember a CT image of neuroblastoma essentially encases the vessels and their branches. So complete resection in most of the cases is actually not feasible. So this study actually emphasized that use of surgery alone is curative for most patients with low-risk neuroblastoma. Complete resection is not mandatory, and use of chemo is restricted to only specific situations. Another study by Siopen reiterates the same fact that the overall survivals are exceptionally good, and probably surgery alone will yield for both stage 1 and stage 2 very good outcomes without any further treatment. And even in this study, you will see that 50% of these patients had residual disease after surgery. So even if the surgeon doesn't remove everything, if the patient fits into low risk basket, you need not offer any adjuvant therapy. Now I come to intermediate risk. In intermediate risk, most of the patients will receive chemotherapy with or without surgery. In a select group, surgery can be done followed by observation, though this is a question which is debatable. Radiation therapy is reserved for only few patients who progress during treatment with chemotherapy or have progressive unresectable disease after treatment with chemotherapy. So this was one probably the only randomized controlled trial which head-on compared RT versus no RT. This was published in 1991, and it said that radiotherapy had a significant impact on local control, EFS and OS, but the data of that time is of no value in this stage, wherein now we know that biology plays the most important role, and now we know the status of the McKin copy number. So this data cannot be extrapolated onto current scenario. I will again come back to the COG-P 9641 study. 500 patients of intermediate risk were treated with moderate doses of chemotherapy, generally between 4 to 8 cycles of the same drugs. Surgery was done in some instances, but radiotherapy was restricted to only 2.5% of patients. Though this trial actually did not mention who were these patients and why were they offered radiotherapy, but yes, only in a very small group of patients radiotherapy was offered, and the 3-year OS of the entire group was 96%. So to summarize the role of RT in low and intermediate risk, the most cooperative groups are withholding RT for low and intermediate groups except in conditions like progression despite surgery and chemotherapy, or for unresectable primary in intermediate risk. But it is also used for some emergency cases in low and very low risk tumors. I will come to that later. Now, when we come and talk about high risk neuroblastoma, the outcomes are very poor. The Western data shows the outcomes of around 40 to 50%, but in developing countries, the outcomes are exceptionally poor, essentially because patients present with advanced stages, there is lack of access to transplant, there is lack of access to immunotherapy. Anti-GD2 is now showing significant improvement in terms of overall survival. So essentially, high-risk neuroblastoma in developing country, the outcomes are between 10 to 20%, and in some series, you will see that the outcome is even less than 10%. Now, in any tumor, when the outcomes are so poor, you try to, chip in with everything that is possible. So the current treatment protocol that we have here in TMH, we use rapid Kojek chemotherapy. We start with the induction chemotherapy. The patient is evaluated with MIBG and PET-CT. Then the patient is operated. Following surgery, the patient is sent for myeloablative therapy and peripheral blood stem cell rescue. This is followed by radiotherapy to the primary tumor, plus minus to the metastatic sites. And this is consolidated by giving cis-retinoic acid. And in centers abroad, when there is access to anti-GD2 antibodies, the dinutuximab, then it has definitely shown significant improvement in outcome. This is the protocol that we use. There are 5 drugs: cyclophosphamide, etoposide, vincristine, cisplatin, and carboplatin. And surgery is done on day 90. Harvesting is done between day 80 to 100. Patient is restaged after day 70, essentially to evaluate response. RT is offered after 1 to 2 months of completion of transplant. So what is the role of radiotherapy in high-risk disease? Although distant relapse are the main obstacle to cure in these patients, local failure remains a significant problem. And it is seen that even in aggressively treated cases, late local recurrence are seen more than 5 years after completion of therapy. In this study by GPOH, which is the NB97 study, the study essentially compared transplant with oral maintenance chemotherapy. In this study, there was a very important aspect that was seen, that there was no difference in outcomes based on extent of resection, whether the resection was complete or grossly incomplete. Patients who had gross disease after surgery were offered radiotherapy, and it was seen that there was no difference between the two types of patients. Though benefit of RT was not documented in that paper, but probably radiotherapy that was offered to patients who had gross disease probably kind of balanced out the outcomes. So if there is gross residual disease after chemotherapy, after surgery, should we offer radiotherapy? So we have this St. Jude's data to help us of 63 patients. 17 patients received radiotherapy and 46 did not. Greater percentage of patients who had residual disease before consolidation than did patients in the no RT arm. It was significant. Gross total resection was achieved less often in RT arm. This is obvious because most of those patients who had gross disease were offered radiotherapy. And it was seen that in these two arms, the RT versus no RT, the local failure was the same, essentially because RT kind of helped patients who had gross residual disease. Similar study from the University of Atlanta, 34 high-risk neuroblastoma patients, and all patients had gross residual disease post-surgery, and 21 to 24 gray of RT was given, and the 3-year local control was 94%. So what if some patients do not have gross disease? If more than 90% of tumor is removed during surgery and there is no imaging proof of gross residual disease on the CT scan post-surgery, is there role of RT in high-risk neuroblastoma? So the data comes from Dana-Farber and Children's Hospital. 118 patients with complete or near complete remission after chemotherapy and surgery. Patients who received RT, their local failures were 40%. Patients who did not receive RT, local failures were 86%. But this was an old data published in 1984. So there is evidence from literature that probably all patients with high-risk neuroblastoma may benefit from local RT for microscopic as well as gross residual disease. And all high-risk current protocols of high-risk neuroblastoma incorporate radiotherapy to the tumor bed in all patients. So what is the optimum dose of RT? Across all series, you will see it's around 21 to 24 gray, and the local control is around 90% with this kind of a dose. So is there a dose-response relationship? There is no proper dose-response relationship study, but in this study, if you see, patients who were given TBI, the dose of RT was around 10 gray, local control was 22%, but when boost dose of 10 gray was added, the local control was 52%. There was a significant difference between the two. And it was said that at least 21 gray should be offered to patients who undergo complete resection, and probably who have gross residual disease, we should give a little higher dose. So can we reduce dose if we are seeing local controls are so good? So the data comes from MSKCC 245 children. An important point to note is that none of these patients had gross residual disease. So they all had very good surgeries done. 21 gray was offered to the tumor bed, and at a median follow-up of 6.4 years, the local control was 90%. Most of the patients who failed, they failed distally. But most of the local failures that happened were within the RT field. So given the young age of patient, concern for late effects, and local control more than 90%, dose reduction may be appropriate for patients who do not have MECAN amplification in high-risk neuroblastoma and who have achieved GTR. Am I audible, Dodul?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So another paper which discusses role of de-escalation in high-risk neuroblastoma. This was published just 2 years back, 76 patients, and it was seen that in patients who did not have the image-defined risk factors, the IDRF, and patients who had more than 90% resection, the 3-year local relapse-free, loco-regional failure-free survivals were 100%, irrespective whether you gave RT or not. So probably this is the group wherein we should prospectively see whether we can omit radiotherapy. Is dose escalation needed when there is gross disease? So this data comes from MSKCC, which was published in PBC in 2018, just 2 years back. And 19 out of 331 patients underwent subtotal resection. And with a median follow-up of around 6 years, the 5-year local failure was 17.2%. But if you look at patients who received less than 30 gray, the local failures were 30%, and patients who received more than 30 gray, that is 30 to 36 gray, the local failures were 0%. So probably there is a need of a higher dose where there is gross residual disease. This was published, this was presented in ASTRO 2019, the ANBL 532 COG study, and was published 2 months back, this was a randomized controlled trial in which patients were randomized into single or tandem transplant after induction chemo. Local treatment was surgical resection followed by radiotherapy, and patients received 21 gray to the PTV and 14 gray boost to patients, to a total of 36 gray when there was gross residual disease, that is to the GTV. And it was seen that boost RT, that is, so the baseline dose that was given to all patients was 21, and patients who had residual disease were boosted to up to 36 gray. And this study did not show an improvement in local control, and hence as of now, dose escalation for gross residual disease is not recommended. Another question that we face as radiation oncologists is, do we need to chase the nodes? We know the pattern of relapse of neuroblastoma is systemic, but at times these patients do present with significantly enlarged regional nodes, at times even non-regional nodes. So should we chase these nodes? There are 2 studies, though they are not very well conducted and robust data, but these studies, one of which is this study that I have mentioned here, the COG study, it says that we need not chase, and there is no benefit of extensive lymph nodal irradiation when we are contouring our CTVs. Is there a role of RT to the metastatic sites? So it's a very important question. It was seen that significant number of patients, for example, in this study, 70% of patients had relapse in previously involved site. In one study, 82% of patients relapsed at the same metastatic sites. So these findings suggest that probably just chemotherapy or a high-risk treatment protocol is suboptimal in terms of disease control at metastatic sites, and even metastatic sites merit some local treatment. So these are two very meticulously done studies. This one is by Richard Lee, published in IJRO BP in 2016, and they evaluated the metastatic sites, and you can see there are two columns. One is a column where TBI was given, second column where the one column here TBI was offered, and in this column no TBI was offered. And you can see that the proportion of patients relapsing in previous sites was significantly higher in patients who were not offered TBI. Another study by Polishchuk published 1 year later. You see the larger circle, the blue circle is actually the metastatic sites, the upfront metastatic sites. The smaller circle, the gray and the red, the small circle, actually shows the sites which were at the time of relapse, and you see the amount of overlap. So there is a significant overlap in relapse patterns in metastatic neuroblastomas. And in the same study, it was seen that though it was not statistically significant, but in irradiated metastatic sites, the relapse rates were less. Just a minute. Yeah. So most of the times when we see neuroblastomas with distant metastasis, the disease is generally disseminated. Seldom will you see an oligometastatic neuroblastoma. So can we chase every single metastatic site? So a very reasonable approach is to give radiotherapy to the sites that were avid on PET and MIBG after induction therapy. And this was exactly what was done in this study, where 30 patients of high-risk neuroblastomas were offered 24 to 30 gray to primary, and the MIBG avid sites post-induction therapy were treated with 24 gray. And they saw that local control at primary site was 84 and local control at metastatic site was 74. Similar study in which median dose of RT was 21.6 gray, local control at primary was excellent, 94%. But in metastatic sites, quite a lot of times, 23% of times in-field recurrence was seen. So the authors commented that probably metastatic sites require a little higher dose, and especially some sites like Calvarium are probably radio-resistant and require a much higher dose. So similar study in which metastatic sites were offered radiotherapy, and the outcomes, the local control outcomes, were 92% in patients who were irradiated as compared to 67% patients who were not irradiated, which tells us that consolidative RT is an effective modality for having optimum local control at metastatic sites. The ANBL 532, the recently completed COG phase 3 frontline, received EBRT to up to 5 sites of MIBG avid diseases. Another role of radiotherapy as a TBI conditioning regime, which is not practiced now because of considerable late toxicities with TBI, and more chemotherapy based regimens are used, and we have gained quite a lot of experience with that. So TBI is not used that commonly as a conditioning regimen currently. There is also very interesting role of radiotherapy in certain emergency situation of low risk and intermediate risk neuroblastomas. So when it comes to spinal cord compression, earlier quite a lot of these patients were offered radiotherapy, but currently chemotherapy is the first treatment of choice. We have to understand that the neurological outcome will essentially depend upon what were the neurological deficits when we initiated the treatment. It has been seen in multiple studies that the outcome is similar with chemotherapy, radiation therapy, or surgery. But if you look at late complications, reasonably they are the least with chemotherapy. And hence, for spinal cord compression, chemotherapy is the first treatment of choice, and radiation or surgery is considered when patient does not respond to chemotherapy. Radiation is essentially considered as the last resort. So there is some role of RT in 4S. Most of these patients do not even require therapy. As I mentioned, 4S can be observed. But some patients who present with massive hepatic metastasis, hepatomegaly causing respiratory compromise, these patients were offered radiotherapy around 3 to 6 gray. These are very sensitive tumors, and you're not looking at tumor control, you're just looking at symptom control. So the doses were given between 3 to 6 gray. These radiotherapy was tolerated very well, and these patients had overall very good outcome after radiotherapy. Radiation is also used in CNS relapse and for palliation. When we come to the technique of RT, understandably so, the contour of the tumor bed or the gross tumor, or when we are giving definitive RT, is irregular, and it is very close to critical normal structures. These are all young patients. Though the doses are moderate, so acute side effects are not that significant, but late side effects are a major concern. So logically, conformal radiotherapy should be used, and it has been seen in multiple studies that IMRT provides excellent local control. And if at all dose escalation is required, IMRT is probably the best way to treat these patients. There have been comparisons between conventional radiotherapy, IMRT, and proton beams also. So initial dosimetric studies that were available with proton beam appeared very promising, and but the decision is to be taken case by case. There were certain cases, after careful evaluation of renal dosimetry, it was seen that IMRT was better as compared to proton beam. Recently published article in PBC, this is the MD Anderson data of, I don't remember exact what was the number of patients, but I think 20 or 30 patients who had excellent local control. The patients had acceptable toxicity, and most of the patients actually succumbed to distal failures. So what are the long-term side effects of radiotherapy? You will read multiple articles on, there is reduction in height, there is metabolic syndrome, but very few studies which are categorically looking only at neuroblastoma. So there are these two studies in which it was seen that the musculoskeletal abnormalities were commonest. And we have to also understand that this is not just radiotherapy, but probably also related to surgery and or chemotherapy. It was seen that musculoskeletal abnormalities were not seen when the doses were less than 31 gray. Another, this study from MSKCC, which was published in IGROBP in 2017, evaluated the radiological findings, renal scarring, cortical thinning, renal atrophy, and also the BUN and the creatinine and the GFR. None of these patients actually had symptomatic chronic renal failures, but it was seen that if the mean kidney doses of 15 gray to the more exposed kidney and 11 gray to the less exposed kidney, then you can be sure that the long-term outcomes will not be, long-term renal outcomes will not be compromised. So the take-home message is radiotherapy is no longer used except for some select indications in low and intermediate risk group, essentially because their overall outcome is exceptionally good. Radiotherapy plays an important role in high-risk neuroblastoma for local tumor bed adjuvant RT, as well as RT to the post-induction therapy avid metastatic sites. It is important to use conformal portals, and it can also be used for emergency situations. So I'll quickly come, Dodul, do we have time?
Yes, ma'am, we have time.
So, so just to, I'll quickly brush through two cases that I have kept for you all. So this is a 3-year-old. So this is more than 18-month-old. It's a 3-year-old child who presented with abdominal pain. There was fever, low grade, loss of appetite and weight. An ultrasound done outside showed abdominal mass. A CT done showed retroperitoneal nodal mass as well as a adrenal mass. Patient had very high LDH and ferritin levels. I had not mentioned earlier in my staging, but LDH and ferritin are also kind of surrogate markers for high-risk neuroblastoma, and in certain cases wherein you are not able to send the tissue for moleculars, if a patient has extensive disease, LDH and ferritin are elevated, can be safely considered in high-risk treatment protocol. So PET-CT was done. It showed metabolically active left suprarenal mass, which was indistinct from the left adrenal gland. And this was also associated with massive retroperitoneal lymphadenopathy, and there was no other site of disease. So this is a loco-regional disease, non-metastatic. So we obviously sent the tissue for biopsy. It was undifferentiated neuroblastoma. MIBG also showed uptake at the suprarenal mass, and there was no uptake anywhere else. This patient on MLP, which is the multi-ligand plexus and assay, showed NMIC amplification as well as loss of 1P, 11P, 11Q, 4P, and 9P. This patient was started on rapid COJEC. Response PET-CT showed partial response. I again didn't mention about the Curie score, the Syopen score, and the INR, the International Neuroblastoma Risk Scoring. So essentially the pre-treatment as well as post-treatment avidity and the size of the tumor is measured, and these patients are scored. And it has been seen that these scores have an impact in overall outcome. So this patient had partial response. This patient underwent, you can see the image, the patient presented with this extensive disease and had a good response to induction chemotherapy. This patient underwent gross tumor resection, which is defined as more than 90% of resection, and the child also had to lose one kidney. This patient underwent transplant and then came to us for external RT, and you can see this is what we contoured, though no contouring guidelines exist for neuroblastoma, but most of the studies have used the pre-chemotherapy, pre-surgery tumor volume and extent, and they grow by 5 millimeter to around 1.5 centimeters. In TMH, we grow by around 0.5 centimeter, respecting the anatomical barriers. And obviously PTV is grown as per the institutional policies. We gave a dose of around 19 gray. So we have two doses for neuroblastoma when there is no gross residual disease. The hyperdensity that you see here is not the residual calcification in neuroblastoma. These were vascular clips. So we planned this patient for 19.8 gray 11 fraction. If this patient had significant residual disease, we would have offered 25.2 in 14 fraction. And we obviously treated this patient with IMRT respecting renal, the contralateral, the only kidney that was there in that patient, respecting tolerance of that kidney. The second girl is a 3-year-old girl. It's obviously non-infantile, presented with symptoms. Apart from generalized body ache and loss of appetite, this patient also had scalp swelling. A CT brain which was done outside showed soft tissue deposits in frontal and parietal bone. The baseline PET-CT showed multiple calvarial lesions, multiple other bony mets involving the sphenoid, the left hemimandible, maxillary sinus, neural foramen of L3 vertebra with intraspinal extension. This patient, the main mass was in the abdomen, but patient also had cervical lymph nodes and probably also marrow involvement. So this was disseminated disease in a 3-year-old child. You can see the calvarial mets, you can see the sphenoid lesion here. MIBG scan showed increased tracer uptake in abdomen, which was the primary, as well as multiple sites in the skeletal system. The urinary catecholamines were elevated and bone marrow biopsy was involved by neuroblastoma. This patient was started on rapid COJEC chemotherapy, and there was partial response at the abdominal mass, complete response at all the metastatic sites except for the sphenoid. This patient underwent surgery followed by transplant, and when the patient came to us, we gave 19.8 gray to the tumor bed. This patient had a small primary but disseminated disease, and we also gave 19.8 gray in 11 fraction to the sphenoid metastatic site. So this is an image of a patient wherein significant gross residual disease was there. There is nothing like unresectable tumors in neuroblastoma because essentially it all depends upon the expertise of the surgeon. Even if disease is left behind, it is okay. And very rarely patients are referred to us for definitive radiotherapy, as in this case. You can see significant residual disease, and we gave 25.2 in 14 fractions over 5 weeks. Thank you.